Here's your Unit 3B test review, looking over the study guide. First off, we're going to start with the executive branch. A couple of the roles: Commander-in-Chief, things found in the Constitution, can grant reprieves and pardons, can appoint officials, judges, ambassadors, can create a cabinet to head the 15 cabinet positions in the executive branch, can make treaties, and then officially signs them if they're approved by Congress. Also, some of the roles stated: Commander-in-Chief, Chief of State, Chief of Diplomat, Chief Administrator, Chief Executive, and Chief Legislator, all different types of duties the President has. Over time, the President's popularity usually declines. Sometimes it will peak at re-election time. The President has the power to appoint anyone in the federal cabinet. We have the White House staff as well as the executive office of the President versus your cabinet members, and we'll get to that later. The EOP, or the White House office, advises, appointed, but not approved. So the President hires these people, but does not have to be approved by Congress. They always deal with the sensitive issues, work very closely with the President, versus the cabinet members are really just in charge of their departments and their branches. The White House Chief of Staff, one of the most important individuals, right-hand man of Congress, or of the President, not approved by Congress. People like the National Security Advisor advise on all the security issues, meet with the President each day, and is part of the executive office. The President can veto a message sent by Congress. Again, pocket veto, let it sit on the desk and for 10 days, and if Congress adjourns before then, it becomes a pocket veto. 2/3 of the percentage of vetoes needed to override a veto by Congress, not often done, and recently done to Obama. A line item veto declared unconstitutional takes out part of a bill. Some governors can do this, but the Supreme Court said this is unconstitutional. A pocket veto. Again, we just talked about this. If Congress adjourns and the President does not sign it within 10 days, the President can ignore it and it dies right there. It becomes a veto. A signing statement is a document that the President will use to reveal what he or she thinks about a new law and how it should be enforced by the executive department. Congress does not like this because it almost acts as a line item veto. The Supreme Court has said this is okay to do. Executive orders, full force of law, helps the executive office and agencies implement things. Yes, there is judicial review. The President and its advisors can use executive privilege, so the right of privacy and conversation between the President and their advisors. 25th Amendment deals with your presidential succession, the VP right behind the President. And looking at the War Powers Act, Congress limits the power of the President. This is because they asked the President to notify them within 48 hours of sending any troops into combat. Must consult with Congress afterwards to talk about this decision. Any conflict is limited to 60 days until Congress takes official action. They can extend it, or they can make the troops withdraw. Again, Congress funds the military, so this is how they can control the President through the War Powers Act. Presidential persuasion of Congress. Presidents try to use their personal popularity to gain support. Usually has little impact, especially in re-elections when the President is promoting certain politicians. It usually has no bearing. Powers granted to the President by the Constitution are enumerated or express powers. Enumerated powers are powers that the President has but are limited. Express powers are strictly in the Constitution. For example, the President is the Commander-in-Chief. Formal powers, informal again, setting budgets and agendas, sending troops to conflict. Formal, strictly stated in the Constitution, making Supreme Court appointments. And again, the role of a cabinet member: you are the head of an executive department. You see over that department. You're appointed by the President, but you must be approved by the Senate. Example: Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, head of the Homeland Security Department. Moving on to the judicial branch. What is covered under judicial review? Supreme Court rules over any executive decisions, any legislative decisions like bills that are trying to be passed, and they determine if they are constitutional. If they violate the Constitution, they declare them unconstitutional under judicial review. And this was set up and established by Marbury versus Madison, where the Supreme Court applied judicial review for the first time and strengthened the power of the Supreme Court and the judicial branch. Your appellate courts and your district courts are where the court cases begin. They actually are trial courts. There's 94 district courts. They're actually trials where there's lawyers, juries, and if there's a decision someone disagrees with, they can appeal it to the appellate court. There's 11 different appellate courts. There's no jury, no witnesses, just statements by lawyers and briefs written. Original intent. This is the theory of enforcing and interpreting the law the way the founders intended. So word for word what the Constitution said. Political experience, prior to appointment to the court. So judges usually are appellate judges. A lot of times they do have some type of political science background. They most likely are lawyers as well. Nomination and approval. You must be nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate, and you serve for life as a federal judge. Again, the Congress can check over these appointments by confirming them, and that's the Senate. Cases accepted for consideration by the Supreme Court. Writ of Cert is where an individual can write complaining about the court case, whether it's from a state Supreme Court dealing with a national issue or from an appeals court. And there's 7,000 plus that are usually written. Only 100 to 150 cases are actually heard by the Supreme Court. In this writ of cert, they are writing why they believe their case should be heard. If it's accepted, then the lawyers will issue briefs, each issue briefs from both sides, and they have a certain amount of days to do so. Then they have oral arguments, 30 minutes each side. After that, the Supreme Court will discuss and vote on by the justices. Again, in order to hear a case, 4 judges must consider the case and say, yes, we want to hear this. After they do hear the case and hear the oral arguments and the briefs, then a majority, you have to get 5 of the 9. A writ of cert, again, to bring up, used to apply to Supreme Court consideration. They look at lower courts' documents, so if they want to look at the case, they ask the lower courts to bring those documents. In Forma of pauper, the poor person, so eliminates any financial impediments. If someone is trying to appeal their case, they can't afford it, they will eliminate those financial impediments. Stare decisis, defer to a Supreme Court decision. They're going to look at old cases or a precedent to determine if they have to hear this case. If not, if there's a case that already touches on the issue, they'll reverse or go back to that case and say, based on this past decision, this is what we found, and we don't have to hear it. Amicus curiae briefs, brief written by someone with strong beliefs. Could be an interest group, so it could be a gun rights activist that's dealing with a case, and they want the Supreme Court to hear their opinion. A concurring opinion, that connects with a majority opinion. So majority opinion is the opinion of the winning side. The majority of the justices, they write up why they decided some way. And a concurring opinion is one or more justices agree with the majority decision, but they might have additional or different reasons of why they sided. Versus the dissenting opinion, that's the losing side. I disagree, and this is why. Different ways to Supreme Court justices interpret, so activism versus restraint. Activism, bold policy decisions, new constitutional grounds. They interpret based on their own views in kind of an ever-changing constitution, versus restraint, whatever the framers meant, they're going to stick to that original intent. Congress creates those federal courts. The dual system, all that means is that there's state courts and there's federal courts. And then again, originalist jurists interpret the Constitution like the framers intended to. A couple potential FRQ questions here. War Powers Act, again, we kind of went over that. What the Commander-in-Chief can do, 48 hours within sending troops. Make sure you notify Congress, consult with Congress. Limited to 60 days, then Congress decides extend or withdraw. A lot of times they do extend. They won't go against the President and supporting troops. Presidential congressional relationships, so you have separation of powers, checks and balances. Congress can pass laws, President can veto those laws. Congress can declare war and fund troops, President can put troops into conflicts. President appoints, Senate approves. Senate and the House have the power to impeach. The President has the power to make treaties, but the Senate must approve. You need to know the three different types of decisions that the Supreme Court makes: majority, concurring, and dissenting. Okay, how the Supreme Court operates. They have 9 justices. They hear about 100 to 150, so around an average about 120 cases a year. They have the final decision. There's no trial. Again, 30 minutes for each side. Justices discuss, vote, and write their briefs. They work from October to June. Cases are brought up by that writ of cert. And then presidential appointments. The Senate approves. They usually choose nominees with similar views as the president. Experience is always important. They will consult senators from that state to see if they have approval. Sometimes they could choose a moderate to get their approval so that they know it will be passed by Congress. And they're always looking to select qualified candidates. That is Unit 3B.